Hello and welcome to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. My name is Yousef Ahmed and I will be your host for today's discussion. And we are talking about the work of Refaat Alareer, the author and academic killed by Israel in December 2023. So following his death, there was a posthumous collection of his work, which was gathered into a book with the title of his most famous poem, If I Must Die. I am joined by a close friend of Rifat who wrote the introduction to the book, Yousef Aljamal. Thank you, Yousef, for joining us.
Thank you, Nassim, for having me.
Yousef finished his PhD in the Middle East Institute, Saqqara University. He works as the Gaza coordinator for American Friends Service Committee. Let's begin, Yousef, with a bit about what you do at the moment with the Gaza coordinator for as a Gaza coordinator for the American Friends Services Committee, because it's a committee many of us may not have heard about. So just begin by telling us a bit about your work and that you're doing.
The American Friends Service Committee is a Quaker organization that started Palestinian refugee camps in Gaza in 1948. So it has a long history in Palestine and Gaza. We still continue to work on the ground in Gaza. We also do advocacy work within the United States in order to push the US to change its policy on Palestine and Gaza. We organize a weekly action known as the Action Hour, where about 200 people gather from across the United States. They receive updates about Gaza and they make calls to the US Congress. Everyone calls their representative in order to try to change the policy the US takes on Gaza, especially now with the ongoing genocide that's been taking place for about 22 months.
And how did you come to be involved with this project of compiling the work of Rifat? You wrote the introduction, as I said. So talk to us a little bit about your involvement with that project.
So in 2007, I met Rifat for the first time. I was his student in Gaza at the English language department at the Islamic University of Gaza. And since then, a relationship has started with Rifat as a lecturer, but also a friend, and later a close friend. I traveled with Rifat. I lived with Rifat. I learned a lot from Rifat throughout the years. And when Rifat was assassinated on December 6th, 2023, I felt devastated, but I also remember that it was Rifat who planted in thousands of his students the love of storytelling and writing. And I wanted to, compile his works in a book that could be accessible. This way, we keep his legacy alive and also support his surviving kids and family. So I collected the writings. Many of these writings were already published, both poetry and prose, in a book that was published by Or Books in November 2024. And since the book has been published, tens of thousands of copies. The number I have is 44,000 copies have been sold up until 3 months ago. And now it's much more. So there's a huge interest in Rifat's legacy writings, life. People are interested in reading about him by reading his own articles. So all of these articles were mostly written before Rifat was assassinated and published. So written and published before he was assassinated, but there are also 3 articles that were published after he was assassinated that he wrote in October 2023, and he wasn't able to publish. So people are interested in this legacy and Rifat as a global figure out of Gaza. He is the storyteller of Gaza per se. And a lot of people were looking up to his updates. So I thought that, compiling the book and making it accessible will allow people to read more about Refaat and learn more about Refaat as a global intellectual and revolutionary who paid a very heavy price. That's his life for telling Gaza's story. And as I said, the interest is huge in his legacy and his writings. People continue to talk about him, their libraries, buildings, scholarships, camp in Gaza now that hosts injured people that are named after Rifat. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, he after his death, he became globally acclaimed. His reputation spread across the world in the West as well. You know, Hollywood stars read his poem out. So he's become an icon of Palestinian resistance through his work, through his poem, I guess. I mean, before we speak about that, um, can you speak a little bit about his assassination? Do you think it was a targeted assassination of Rifat itself, or do you think he was killed as part of a much, a different campaign where he was collateral damage, some may say, or do you think it was targeted? Because one of the allegations against Israel is that Israel is committing scholasticides, which is the killing of Palestinian scholars, Palestinian institutions of learning. We've seen that in the Gaza genocide. So, do you think Rifat was a victim of that policy of annihilating Palestinian scholarship?
Absolutely. Rifat received a call from an Israeli intelligence officer on the same day he was assassinating, threatening him that they will get him, they will kill him, that they knew his location, etc. And that's why he left the school where he was sheltering along with his wife and kids and moved to his sister's house, which is fairly like smaller and had less people. And soon after he got into the building, Israel targeted the apartment and killed him. So it was a targeted assassination. It was well calculated, and Israel intentionally killed and murdered Rifat. And again, it's part of its campaign against Palestinian intellectuals and education, as you mentioned, the destruction of the Islamic University of Gaza, the English language department that Rifat headed for a couple of years is part of this as well. So targeting hundreds of Palestinian intellectuals, especially those who speak up against Israel's atrocities and genocide in Gaza, is part and parcel of allowing Israel to spread propaganda and narrative about its genocide in Gaza. Rifat was one of the most important people who spoke during the genocide out of Gaza. He refused to leave Gaza City, the northern part of Gaza, to the south, and he chose to stay in Gaza City to tell its story. So he stayed committed to his beliefs, the storytelling, to the Palestinian narrative, and that's why Israel assassinated him.
Mm. And I guess for someone like you who is going to be telling the story of Rifat through his work, through his poems, um, what, what did you want the readers to understand about him? I mean, how did you go about selecting the work that you wanted to include in that book? So, what was your thought process in the way you uh, collected the work of Rifat?
So, for the most part, Rifat encouraged others to write. He did not write much himself. The book is made of 260 pages. I believe Rifat would have easily published 10 books in his lifetime, but his focus was on his students. He encouraged his students to write. He planted the seeds of writing, storytelling in thousands of his students, as I said. However, he was able to publish some of his writings, both features, opinion articles, book chapters, poetry. His most famous poem, If I Must Die, was written in November 2011, and he wrote it for his daughter. And he penned this poem to his ex timeline a month before he was assassinated in November 2023, and it became viral after that. So he wrote this poem years before. He wrote many of his articles years before, and he started writing more and opening up about his own personal struggle under occupation and siege in Gaza. Very, very late in his life, I believe around 2022, 2023, he contributed a chapter to Light in Gaza, which was also published by Haymarket, supervised and funded by the Quakers, the American Friends Service Committee. And although I was very close to him, there were many details that I did not know about his life. So he never bragged about his own struggle. Although he lost his brother, he was injured himself. He lost his uncle because of torture in Israeli jails. So in this chapter, he opens up and he talks about his own struggle. But if you also look at other writings, he talks about his neighbors, his friends. In his poetry, he talks about the plight of people in Gaza, the struggle, the day-to-day struggle of people in Gaza under siege, the relationship with the land. He loved cultivating olives and harvesting olives. He would talk about his grandma and his mother and how they planted in him the love for storytelling and writing. So the different themes and topics, as I said, poetry and prose. It talks about Gaza, it talks about his own life, his own family, but also people around him.
You mentioned his family. I mean, from what I read, he had 5 or 6 children. Do you know the whereabouts of his children? Are they still alive?
So Rifat had 6 children, as you said. One of them, Shayma, who he wrote the poem for, If I Must Die, was assassinated, also killed, along with her husband and newly born child, Abdurrahman. So Rifat became a grandfather, but he did not live long enough to see his first grandchild. And then Israel assassinated and killed his daughter along with her child and husband. Rifat did not see the child. 5 of his children are physically fine. They're in Gaza City along with his wife. His brother was also killed along with him, along with his sister and 4 of his nephews and nieces. So many of his relatives were killed during the current genocide in Gaza, including his own daughter.
And you mentioned in your introduction, you describe him as an organic intellectual, someone deeply grounded in the everyday lives of the people around him. So describe that in practice. You know, from your experience with him, how did Rifat, as an organic intellectual, as you describe, appear in public? What were the key defining features of that?
Rifat finished his master's degree from UCL in London and his PhD from UPM, University Putra Malaysia in Malaysia. And he had many opportunities to teach outside Gaza, but he chose Gaza. He chose to return back to Gaza. And he would always encourage his students to come back and teach and change. That was his choice in life. And he loved Gaza. As I said, he stayed in the northern part of Gaza, his town, Shuja'iyya. He was very proud to be from Shuja'iyya. And he always talked about Shuja'iyya in his writings, reminding people that he grew up there. So while in Gaza, he worked with people from different backgrounds, different ages. He made English accessible to everybody because in the past was only accessible by the elites and rich people. He made it very accessible to everybody because he provided English courses to students for free. And I helped him organize dozens of these courses, lectures and workshops. So he worked with different people from different backgrounds, different ages. He encouraged his students to write. He would invite them to join these courses. And so he was very much in touch with reality and people on the ground. I remember one time he donated 15 books at the English language department to students who did not have enough money to buy books, saying that someone donated these books. He even did not say that the donation was made by him. So he wasn't just an intellectual in his ivory tower, lecturing people. about the ills of the society. No, he himself was engaged in bringing about change, social change, economic change. He helped many of his students get jobs. He wrote hundreds of recommendation letters to his students so that they pursue their education outside Gaza and come back and change their lives and the lives of their families and people around them. So he was an actor of change in many different ways.
That's amazing, your description of him. Why in particular did he prefer to write in English instead of Arabic? That's an interesting background to this. Why did he want to do that?
Rifat wrote a single poem in Arabic called إلى ولدي أحمد, to my son Ahmed, when he was in London. I'm not aware of any other article that he wrote in Arabic, but despite this, he was very strong in Arabic. He loved Arabic language, grammar, and literature. And he would read novels in Arabic. He introduced us to many novels written in Arabic by Palestinian and Arab intellectuals, such as موسم الهجرة إلى الشمال, the season of migration to the north by Tayyib Saleh. I saw Ramallah, رأيت Ramallah by Murid al-Barghouthi. Also, ولدت هنا, ولدت هناك, I was born here, I was born there. Like countless writings in Arabic. And he always encourage us to read the poetry written by Murid and his son Tamim al-Barghouthi. So he was very much in love with Arabic language. But the reason he chose to write in English is because he believed that there is enough literature in Arabic about Gaza, and there is no struggle to explain Gaza and Palestine to people who speak Arabic. The struggle was in the Western world where English is the mainstream language. He always spoke of literature written in English, not just English literature, as a means to reach out to people who speak English or English-speaking people all over the world, not just in the West. There, hundreds of millions of speakers of English in China, for example, in India. So English is a universal language, and he wanted to change the narrative and the discourse on Palestine and Gaza using English.
Mm. And I mean, given his stature, given his ability and genius qualities, I mean, he's a poet, he's an intellectual, he's a teacher, and deeply connected to the Palestinian issue. I mean, if life took a different turn, what do you think he would be doing now and going forward in terms of defending the Palestinian cause? Where would you have seen him in the stature of someone like Edward Said, some of the other great intellectuals of the Palestinian cause who have contributed so much, or would you have seen him someone becoming a political leader? I mean, what kind of future do you think Rifat would have had in the Palestinian struggle for their rights and resisting Israeli occupation?
It's very sad that we lost Rifat at 44, and he has achieved all of this at 44. If Rifat lived long enough, again, if we look at the poem, he says, if I must die, it means that he wants to live, and death was imposed on him. And he was a man of life. I can talk about this forever. How he loved football, going out to the beach, having fun. If you just sit next to Rifat, you learn and laugh. He was a man of humor. He had a lot to offer in his life. And when he was assassinated, he was a very fine academic, intellectual. I think losing him at 44 means that losing much of his integrity. Like it's hard to find someone who has this level of integrity, um, uh, and someone who's very much in touch with reality, is very organic, intellectual, who has a lot of connections in Gaza, who's changing a whole society, who's changing the narrative on Palestine. In fact, Rifat was the one who found the Israel Project, Global Language Dictionary, and translated it into Arabic long time ago, before it became available on the internet. So we have lost of all of that. Someone who had so much knowledge, who allowed students in Gaza to travel the world without traveling the world, through writings, through books, through pages, through stories. So we lost, even at 44, he was a very fine academic. And I think if he lived longer, he would have been able to contribute much more intellectual debates, depth, translations, literature, philosophy, politics, even football and films. He was into footballs and films. And he would always follow the trend. He who was on social media, he would encourage his students as part of assignments sometimes to create Twitter accounts and write about Palestine. So he was very intentional. He knew what he was doing.
Mm.
But even though he was very young when he was killed, I think he managed to achieve something big, planting the seeds of creative writing and storytelling in thousands of students. Many of these students who tweet out of Gaza, who write out of Gaza today, met Rifat at some point in their lives and took a course with him. So it's very sad we lost him. But despite this, because Rifat was a revolutionary intellectual, he was very smart. He was able to create this huge change at a very young age.
That's amazing. So, speak a little bit about his political vision and his views on politics. One of his poem, if I recall, draws parallels between Palestinian suffering and Jewish history. I mean, did Rifat write in a way to build bridges, seek coexistence? What was his political vision for Palestine?
Rifat was for Palestinian resistance in all forms, and he was unapologetic about it. He said this publicly in his interviews, and that's why he was made a target by pro-Israel people. At the same time, he wanted to teach his students to overcome biases. I remember taking English literature course with him in 2007, 2008, where he taught us about Merchant of Venice and Shylock. And he felt very proud of himself and his students when they chose Shylock over Antonio. So they sympathized with the Jewish character. He also taught Hebrew poetry about
Did he
Jerusalem.
speak Hebrew?
No, he did not speak Hebrew. He took a course. I believe he
Mm.
was able to read and write. He took a course as part of his program at the Islamic University of Gaza. If you study English literature, uh, if you study literature in general, whether Arabic or English, you take a course from the Faculty of Arts where you study Hebrew. But other than that, no, he did not speak Hebrew. And even though when the New York Times covered his class and his teaching, they described him as a controversial professor because they did not like the way he taught about resistance. Yes, we do not have a problem with Jews, and Rifat himself had a lot of connections with Jewish Americans. In fact, I know for sure that he stayed with a Jewish family when he during his speaking tour because I was with him in 2014 promoting Gaza Rights Back. So this is a different conversation when you talk about settler colonialism, genocide, and occupation, military occupation. So he was for resistance. He had no problem with Jews who did not occupy Palestine. And he was a supporter of Palestinian rights, unapologetic. He did not write to please, the audience. He even criticized people who classify themselves or who think that they are on the Palestinian side because of some discourse they use. So he never felt shy of naming things and calling a blade a blade.
Mm. And talking about Palestinian resistance and freedom, Rifat, you mentioned, speaks about Palestinians must create a free Palestinian in Palestine in their imagination. So what does that mean, and how did he nurture that vision personally with his
So
students?
when Rifat published Gaza Rights Back, there was he had a conversation with the publisher at the time, Helena Coben. Uh, he vouched for fiction, and she wanted to publish nonfiction. And then eventually she was convinced by Rifat's argument that fiction is universal. and it, transcends the boundaries of borders, ages, genders. It could be read 100 years later, and that's why you just mentioned in the previous question, Rifat talking about Israeli Jews in his poetry. I am you. That's like my history is your history. Uh, so he was very philosophical and deep. And some of the writings in Gaza Rise Back, in fact, get into the psyche of Israeli soldiers who murder Palestinians in Gaza. So he chose fiction, and he believed that fiction can change hearts and minds. It could be turned into cultural productions, films, and it could reach even people who support Israel, because anyone could read a short story. It could be turned into, a performance versus nonfiction that lives for, a few weeks or months or years, and then it could not be read. So he believed in fiction and in literature, in changing the hearts and minds of people. And he encouraged his students, this is how he came about Gaza Writes Back, to write about their experience after Israel's attack on Gaza in 2008, 2009, that claimed the lives of 1,500 Palestinians. As a means of healing, he asked his students to write short stories. And some of the students never wrote a short story in their lives. I wrote a single short story in my life. That was for Gaza Rise Back. Um, but I know other students like Hanan Habashi. She wrote a fantastic short story called Ill for Life. And Rifat took it around the department, and he was bragging uh, about his student who never wrote a short story literature in her life, and was able to produce a very fine piece of literature, of fiction. Um, he always told his students that you have a story. Everyone has a story that deserves to be told. And he would always repeat, publish or perish. But he always also, again, supported the idea of fiction versus nonfiction to reach more people. It doesn't mean that he's against nonfiction. In fact, he wrote nonfiction himself. He also encouraged his students to write nonfiction at some point, features. But when they wrote nonfiction, he always reminded them to tell the stories of people, to interview people on the ground, to share personal stories, because personal stories, same as fiction, is equally able to change hearts and minds.
Rifat, of course, is a man of literature, and we are doing this podcast as part of our Palestine Book Awards series, build up to that. And I think the spirit of Rifat lives on in that kind of event where we are celebrating Palestinian work, Palestinian literature, which, as you mentioned, is a form of resistance, peaceful resistance to Israeli occupation and genocide. But to finish our conversation, what for someone who doesn't know Rifat, what do you think they should take away from his work, If I Must Die? And what is if you were to crystallize his, life and work, what would you say to people who are discovering him for the first time?
Rifat was a very committed, organic intellectual out of Gaza. He came from a very humble background. He grew up in Shuja'iyya neighborhood that is now leveled to the ground. Uh, and he was in touch with all people from all walks of life in Gaza, changing their lives, teaching them creative writing and English as a means of resistance and storytelling. Rifat was someone who loved life. He was always surrounded by friends. He would take them out to the beach, treat them for Palestinian kunafa, and tell stories and jokes. He loved life, really, and he was very creative in many different ways, very smart. His sense of a humor, dark sense of a humor, was exceptional. Um, he also read a lot of books in his life, and he taught these books, recommended these books and novels, plays to his students. And this is how he allowed them to travel outside Gaza, although they live under the siege, through knowledge and through words. And as I said, he was very committed, and the proof to that is that he sacrificed his own life just to tell Gaza's story. And he had many options to travel outside Gaza or to be in relatively safer areas in the south. But he chose to stay in Gaza City and to tell the story of his town, Shuja'iyya. And again, the way he told the story was very unapologetic. And this drew targets at him by the Zionists, and they assassinated him. But again, Rifat continues to live in Gaza. We see him through his words, the words of his students, the legacy he left behind, the huge interest of his collection of writings, poetry and prose, If I Must Die. People remembering him and using his name all over the world. I was recently in New Zealand, and a member of parliament told me that he read the poem, If I Must Say, during his inauguration. I was in Belfast in North Ireland, and I saw the poem written on the main wall in front of the Sinn Féin headquarters in Ireland. So Rifat is everywhere. He's a global figure, and by killing him, Israel allowed him to multiply.
Thank you, Yousef. It was a really moving conversation, to be honest with you, and well done for, pay tribute to you for putting all that effort into assembling the work of Refaat Alareer. And as you said, he's a global icon, and part of it is largely because of the work you're doing, and really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us, to discuss your relationship with him and your work as well. Thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in. And I'll see you for another conversation with MEMO. Bye-bye.
Thank you.